A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to TV shows that deserve the spotlight. So, here we go. Back to shows. Man, that last cinematic piece that I talked about, that was brand new in theaters, was quite wild. So, I'm kind of glad I spent quite a long time having to explain all of that in as much detail as I could that day. But hey, back to shows again, before I find another new film to watch in theaters. Today we're going to be focusing on the one and only Hot Wheels Acceleracers. This in fact was a mini-series released throughout the year of 2005 as a follow-up to the somewhat commercial success of Hot Wheels Highway 35 World Race, a full-length feature film produced by Mainframe Entertainment and endorsed by Mattel themselves, to promote a new lineup of Hot Wheels known as Highway 35. While it did become quite a success commercially, it still hadn't really come under as good for the company as it could have been. But nevertheless, they were able to expand on the lore of the franchise and even add a fresh new approach to the story that had already been implemented within Highway 35 World Race. Just 2 years after the movie came out, we got this. Beginning with the first episode, which was a 60-minute long piece pretty much, known as Ignition. It technically picks up a little while after the events of Highway 35 World Race. You know, the famous ending where Burt Wheeler manages to take his father, Major Wheeler, through Highway 35, crossing through the portal with the OR2. It doesn't necessarily pick up exactly where it left off, but it does basically clip note a couple of things. Not through visuals, but through dialogue. Not until much later, at least. But the thing is, though, it actually starts in a supposed Hot Wheels city, which was actually taken over by the racing drones. As you probably know, the drones were in fact created by Galorum. And Galorum, in the movie, was the leader of the Clip organization, a technical rival company of the Scrim Corporation. And the thing is, while the Clip organization and the Scrim Corporation had a bit of a bitter rivalry that technically allowed 35 people in 35 different cars all to get involved with just for the battle of securing the Wheel of Power, which was in fact used as a means of controlling Highway 35 itself. But the thing is, though, in this regard, the racing drones managed to capture this wheel. And as we see from a first-person perspective, which eventually shifts outward to give us a view of what exactly happened, turns out someone in a car was trying to go after the Wheel of Power, but failed miserably. As an insult to injury, he tumbles down the track and falls into a crevice, badly wounded upon impact. This turned out to be none other than Dr. Peter Tesla, the founder and president of the Scrim Corporation himself, who now wants to go after the Wheel of Power for some unknown reason. Well, he basically failed to get it from Galorum, so that intentionally was a bit of a start to what could be a fight for survival, much like how the movie itself played out. But while he manages to escape the grasp of the drones, by sheer luck for the most part, he had yet to basically reconcile with himself, knowing that he failed to get the wheel, and more importantly, he now has to get help from the outside. This help was none other than the people who originally helped him claim the Wheel of Power for his own needs, when the movie happened, basically. But basically, a lot of things have changed. Burt Wheeler, thankfully, is still around and has a passion for racing. We get to see Dior 2 again. We also get to see Kurt Wilde, one of the original antagonists, who basically was a bit more on the neutral side. Well, as we've seen from the movie, he basically went from trying to steal the Wheel of Power for Galorum herself to going against her and helping Vert place it back where it belongs. And of course we know that while it was quite a way to go from being bad to being good within a short period of time, it's good that Kurt himself is still on the good side, basically partnering up with Vert in a team known as Acceleracers, which was led by Nolo Pissarro, who apparently has a desire for revenge. This revenge was basically the loss of his older brother, Tone, whom supposedly was killed by a rival team called the Metal Maniacs. And as we see from some drivers that enter the scene, Taro Kitano, and even the leader, Torque Maddox. Fun fact, that's actually where I got my new middle name, Maddox, from. So, the more you know. Anyways, though, it turns out a race is going to be taking place in the cliffs. Nolo Pissarro and Torque Maddox will, in fact, be racing against each other to determine who is better. Who's a better leader of the team, but more importantly, who does better out on the road and racing. A man known by the name of Monkey, who was basically another member of the Metal Maniacs, was in charge of getting ready and set and then allowing them to go. Basically going from red light to green light in the typical fashion. Much like how the starting drone came up in certain sections of Highway 35 World Race, especially at the beginning of every leg of Highway 35 entirely. It even includes some of the same sound effects that we've heard from the startup drone, though this whole thing is different. Anyways, though, a fierce battle takes place, with both cars ending up getting badly damaged. And the reason was another Metal Maniacs member, somehow trying to get the best of everybody else, Kurt Wild's younger brother, Mark Wild. And he basically manages to succeed not only in taking out Torque and Nolo, wrecking their cars severely. Thankfully, of course, they both survived the impacts, but he himself almost gets himself killed in the process. Not by colliding with them, but actually, he narrowly misses Gig, basically Peter Tesla's robotic assistant, in the clip, or the Scrim Corporation, not the clip. But in any case, he almost falls off the edge of the cliff, but manages to save himself. Eventually, everybody regroups, and Team Teku, as well as some of the Metal Maniacs, manage to head forward to the old Scrim Corporation building, where they meet up with another member of Highway 35, Brian Kadeem. Vert's good friends, the same Brian Kadeem who basically was given the $5 million check that Vert had received for winning the race, as a means to help pay off his people and allow them to live good lives without having to fight for certain resources. It was basically confirmed. Brian does have an African-American descendants, technically. He explained that his home was far from the ocean and that his own people sometimes have to fight just to get drinkable water. Thirst, hunger, and they fight each other, as he so said in one scene of the movie. But one could say that he has done a lot better since that $5 million check was given to him by Vert. But in any case, Kadeem was able to help them fill in on the situation at hand, and they eventually follow him to a secret location. A location that's basically shrouded by some kind of force field. Thankfully, they can pass through it. Monkey was a bit skeptical. He almost doesn't make it. Thankfully, though, he tries again and manages to get through. And then, basically, the big moment comes in. The reintroduction. Peter Tesla appears as a giant head in the room, a holograph of some sorts, and fills them in on everything that's taking place. Starting with the location, obviously. The Acceleracers. Basically, a home facility that Tesla himself created after the Scrim Corporation building that he originally had in the movie was left to be abandoned. Most likely due to the attack of the Clip organization led by Galorum and her racing drones, which also took place in the movie. It's nice that they definitely have a lot of things to do with the movie in connotation with trying to make a continuation from it. It's a lot like how some TV shows were basically adapted from the success of certain movies. Some others, of course, would include Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, Osmosis Jones, and several others, pretty much. In the 2000s, it was a little too common, but one could say that since then, it has changed a bit. Anyways though, their first stop is a place known as the Storm Realm. The Wheel of Power was in fact basically challenging them to different realms based on certain elements and different environments. But the biggest goal in mind for all the racers is to see who has the driving skill necessary to complete the realm without putting them in life-threatening situations. The Storm Realm, its skill is staying focused on the track, even if the lightning all around looks as memorizing as possible. It might be such a sight that's mesmerizing to see, but that's not the important thing though, because you could fly off the track without knowing it. Unfortunate as it might sound though, a lot of bad things happen. The realm itself not only was infiltrated with the drones, but also the dangers of the lightning. I mean, Kurt Wilde especially had it pretty rough. His car gets shocked and he can't really get it started too well. But even if he does, one major obstacle that actually does slingshot in was running over a racing drone, causing his car to flip over severely and even injuring him in the process. As for Vert Wheeler, the OR2, well, it gets sliced in half by the closing of the realm itself. The portal itself slices the car in half. And to make matters worse, even though he makes it out of there alive, with his car sliced up, pretty much, a racing drone was able to grab a hold of the OR2 and go into the Acceleracers with him. So, as it's pretty much said right off the bat, things were not in good shape for anyone at all. Even Monkey himself would agree that one realm was enough for him, and he wanted to go home. And well, even though Mark Wilde has no effort lost and he wants to basically go for another round, a lot of tension does in fact grow between all the racers. Not just between both teams, but also the members of each person. Taro Kitano is left unconscious after he gets zapped by one of the drones. And the 70 Roadrunner that he originally drove in both the movie and here is basically left for scrap because it was taken out by an EMP-like frequency from this, I don't know, it's an energy ball of some sort, but it practically destroys his electronics, rendering it completely useless. But as time passes on, the time in the Acceleracers basically does allow everybody to understand there are a lot of challenges ahead. And eventually, we get to see the rest of the cast, the rest of the drivers associated with Team Teku and Team Metal Maniacs. Shirako Takamoto, Nolo Pissarro, and even Torque Maddox all come into play when they all come into the Technodrome itself. The Acceleracers, not Technodrome of course, is now basically filled with a total of 9 racers. But then, the big moment comes. Porkchop comes crashing into the door. Oh boy, driving a big truck with a huge flatbed, complete with several cars that will thankfully be of assistance. Jackhammer, Rolling Thunder, Riveted. These 3 Metal Maniacs models were basically brought into the light for the first time on screen. And it sure is quite a sight to behold, for the most part. But anyways, another realm comes into play almost immediately after everybody is basically settled in to work on the cars and get them all in working order. And well, pretty much everybody, except for driver Karma Ice, another Teku member, basically has her windshield broken, rendering her unable to go into the realm at all. The Swamp Realm is basically what follows the Storm Realm. The same realm where unfortunately Kadeem could not be rescued from, despite everyone's efforts. And well, the Swamp Realm thankfully is also dealt with, only because of the efforts of Nolo Pissarro and a flashback to what his own brother had told him back in the day. to stay in the groove. And that, thankfully, was the answer to all the trouble that was going on. Every member of Metal Maniacs, Drones, and Teku had all been captured by the giant swamp beast. But Nolo was actually able to outpace the vines and basically go through the portal before everything could be lost. So thankfully, everybody was able to go home pretty much without much harm. Although Vert Wheeler's Power Rage was damaged, so he had to get a ride from Scirocco and have it towed back to the Acceladrome for repairs. So other than that though, everything pretty much went smoothly. And on top of that, Nolo was able to receive the Acceleracharger. And it's a special artifact that is given to the driver who completes the realm simply by accomplishing the one task in hand for every realm of Highway 35. Perform a very specific skill that would be necessary to escape a certain hazard or environmental disadvantage. And in that case, he basically stayed in the groove of the track, found the right spot with just the good amount of grip that would help him in outpacing the vines. And so, this is basically where we end all things considered in Chapter 1. Of course, a few other things take place, including the Cavern Realm and the Lava Realm. But these were basically short segments that you could find on the internet. Or if you had the DVDs of Acceleracers, you could access them from the menus. But then came Chapter 2, the Speed of Silence. Well, just to put things shortly, you have the Water Realm, which unfortunately Vert ends up failing pretty badly, almost losing himself to Power Rage's explosion on a rocky cliff. And Taro Kitano himself was also pretty unlucky. He got hitched by a few racing drones and somehow managed to enter their own realm. Basically, the drone's domain. Thankfully, he was able to get out of that one by completing an entire second loop of the entire track. Yeah, that's right. He started from the very beginning and was actually able to complete the realm just in time for his car to be completely intact even, minus a little burn mark on the back end. Much like what happened with DR2, the portal sliced itself on the back end. It's a bit minimal though, and possibly negligible. Then comes along the Metro Realm, basically a giant city. The main skill involved here, along with the Water Realm where you gotta learn how to hydroplane properly, with the Metro Realm, it's about learning how to brake properly. Have balance in mind, because, as it's canonically mentioned, balance increases traction. And the traction will in fact be necessary to avoid a lot of psychotic truck drivers. It's technically supposed to be some kind of phantom, or possibly even an automated machine. These trucks that are inside the realm basically are out to get the drivers, technically. But even with that in mind, once everything is figured out and everything pretty much goes along smoothly, you know, it eventually builds up to a rather terrifying sight from the drones. A sweeper. Yes. A massive machine that is capable of cleaning up all the cars that it finds and turning it into complete pieces of scrap in just seconds. It can also imprison the drivers within the inside of the cabin, which is unfortunately what happens to the likes of Monkey and Nolo. So Torque Maddox is off to save them both. He basically manages to recover both Monkey and Nolo, and he was even able to keep the Accelerachargers safe. That's right, both the Cavern and Swamp Accelerachargers that they had collected so far. Thankfully, everybody was able to make it out. Even Karma Ice was able to help. So, if that doesn't quite sum up how two rival teams could somehow work together to tackle a bigger problem in life, I don't quite know what will. But basically, Vert Wheeler thinks differently. And he technically leaves the Acceladrome with a motorcycle in hand. Then this is where we get to part 3. the breaking point. This is pretty much the point in the series where Vert Wheeler technically goes through a bit of a phase. His own character arc so far has been on the verge of both failure and misunderstanding of his own judgment and mind. He basically goes back home, which, much like with the movie, has Major Wheeler come by to visit. As we know, Major Wheeler works with the government, and sometimes he would come back home to see Vert with something different going on. In the movie, he came to visit Vert because supposedly he left without permission to go do a bunch of races with some Scrim Corporation person. Well, you probably get the idea there. But this time, Major Wheeler comes back to find Vert with a motorcycle rather than his own car. As we know, Dior 2 was sliced in half during the storm realm as the portal was closing. And now, he has a motorcycle. Thankfully, he knows nothing about what happened to Power Rage, the car that he also got destroyed in the water realm after he failed to hydroplane properly. But in any case, he and Vert had a bit of a discussion that ended with him being forced to stay home. But he was able to sneak out, thankfully. And some people were able to confirm that Major Wheeler, believe it or not, was working with a certain team that actually is rivaling the likes of the Drones, the Teku, and the Metal Maniacs. So, we'll get to those in a bit. But anyways, the next realm that they're going after, well, after all the other shorts that have come and gone basically, is known as the Pipeline Realm. Shirako Takamoto ends up getting Baseline, his own car, pretty much destroyed after a massive fall takes place. And he's forced to use what is known as the EDR, or Emergency Driver Return. A device that can teleport anyone back to the Accelerodrome without their vehicle, if they're in emergency situations of any kind. Such as when Vert almost got killed by an explosion after failing to hydroplane in the water realm. Or when Porkchop basically had to escape from the waters as well. A fear that he basically has. So, basically, we've seen the EDR in usage plenty of times by this point. But it's not going to be the only time that we get to see all this stuff happen. No, because here, what happens is that Shirako, now much like Vert, also has his own motorcycle. A motorcycle that is called Nightlife. But that's not the only character that has a motorcycle. As we know, Porkchop basically had Jackhammer lost to a giant fish. So what does he have to do? He also has to improvise. Basically, he also crafts a motorcycle called Jawjammer. But as we know, that is still not the only motorcycle out there. Because as the Pipeline Realm goes, we get to see the racing drones unveil their own motorcycle model called RD-07. And then, the moment of truth, there's basically secret drivers within the realm that disguise themselves as silver and purple members of a certain organization, with cars that have the same color palettes of silver and purple themselves. Dr. Tesla explains to everybody that it's basically a team that he calls the Silencers. And as we know, that's basically the fourth and final team that we get to see canonically within the series itself. So after the Pipeline Realm is done, with the Acceleracharger being lost once again, much like what happened in the Metro Realm, which, by the way, Monkey was in it as well, like I said. And if you're wanting to know what car he had, well, no, it wasn't Rolling Thunder. It was Spinebuster. Wild car. And he even says it himself, that it's explicitly his car and nobody is to touch it except him. But Monkey goes ahead and does it anyway, and even gets it destroyed by the sweeper. So what happens after that? Mark Wilde assumes that there is poor judgment and a lot of bad decisions taking place within his own team. And so, he challenges Torque Maddox to a race-off, where they can go far from the Technodrome and then come back. Well, Accelerodrome. I don't know why I keep confusing it for Technodrome, but still. What we have here is an epic race that's taken place. between a new car that Mark Wilde had to make on his own, called Flathead Fury, up against Torquematics's Hollowback. And you know what? Speaking of which, Hollowback, Riveted, and Chicane basically are the only cars in the entire series that last from episode 1 all the way to the very end. So those three are pretty much the only ones that we ever get to see from start to finish. Anyways though, the race goes on until finally it's decided. Mark Wilde technically would become the new leader of the Metal Maniacs, but this comes to the point where, after everybody is settled and ready, the alarm sounds, meaning another realm is underway. This time, it's the Junkyard realm. Yeah, so, if you're wondering basically, the Pipeline realm is more like navigating through a giant labyrinth. I don't know if that's supposed to be the skill there, because it's hardly mentioned about what the exact skill is supposed to be in order to complete the realm and earn the Acceleracharger in the process. But as for the Junk realm, Vert Wheeler was able to come back to the Accelodrome and let everybody know he is ready for another round. And they basically bring him something special. Reverb. That's right, the most powerful and fastest of all the members of the Teku. All the cars that are in there, Reverb is the most powerful. It's powered by beryllium and has over 1100 horsepower. An unbelievably light frame, mostly made out of high cast aluminum. And well, after a lot of other things, pretty much, that's just what makes that car such a powerful beast. In the Junk realm, Vert basically uses it with ease. And he even manages to find out what the exact skill is necessary to complete the realm. Finding the apex at every turn. The apex, as you probably know, is basically when you go between different curves. Basically going through the inner part of a curve, then the outward part, until you basically can find a way to get through certain zigzags and chicanes properly in the quickest amount of time possible. But as we pretty much know, the Junkyard realm has its own set of hazards as well. A giant junk monster comes around, and there's even 3 sweepers. The drones pretty much kid nothing about the sweepers, and that more of them are made, and they're all causing havoc. Well, thanks to the efforts of Porkchop and Monkey, and the big truck that he came in the first episode, called Old Smoky, they were actually able to destroy these sweepers by any means. One single smash head on with the sweepers causes them to explode, with another sweeper trampling over the wreckage and causing it to fall off the track. Thankfully, the EDR was in usage, and Porkchop and Monkey were able to escape from the explosion almost unharmed, thankfully. So, after all is said and done, they managed to complete the Junkyard realm and even earn the Acceleracharger. Even the Silencers failed to catch up, and they were able to catch on to the Silencers' moves. So, a good team effort was put in play, and this does allow us to get a little bit closer with the rivalry between Metal Maniacs and Teku being settled for good this time. But once again, it's not over yet. The rivalry between Wilde and Kurt goes on even worse now. Basically, to add insult to injury, Wilde himself ends up falling off the track and practically rendering himself unconscious. It's even found that he was actually unable to get out of the realm, at least before the timer went off and the portal sealed itself. And this is basically where we reach some more segments, basically, short pieces and whatnot, before we get to the 4th and final installment, The Ultimate Race, released in late 2005. Coming so far after what the first one had did in February, this piece, in October of 2005, The Ultimate Race, gives us one big clash. And it turns out, Mark Wilde himself was actually captured by the drone. And even worse, Brian Kadeem himself was transformed into a powerful racing drone, human hybrid. It's quite a grotesque scene, in all honesty. I can't believe that they made this for kids. What can I say? This was back in the day when a lot of things were able to happen virtually without much consequence. Anyways though, the ultimate race picks up with Kurt Wilde begrudgingly wanting to head back into the junkyard realm to save Wilde, even though he cannot do so. There is, however, one last race for them to overcome. The cosmic realm. And what do they do here? They actually come up with a plan to save Mark Wilde from the drones. And they eventually realized that Brian Kadeem was also captured by the drones and held captive for some time. They were able to leech onto a racing drone sweeper, believe it or not, and capture it. They were able to bring everybody from Teku and Metal Maniacs inside safely without any of them being torn apart. And even more so, they were able to get into the racing drone's own realm. So, this is basically where we get to a big point in the story. Nolo figures out that his own brother Tone died in an explosive wreck because he ended up drifting too far. And that caused him to lose control and eventually smash into something, causing the car to explode on impact. Nolo's own brother died from his own faults and not by anything that Tor could have done. So, this is basically the revelation that he's come to, and how he can basically absolve the issues between himself and Metal Maniacs. This is basically where the rivalry between them technically comes to an end, once and for all. All the members of both teams are now in agreement with each other that they should learn to work together from here on out. And going forward, that's exactly what happens. They infiltrate the racing drone's base. Kurt Wilde was able to get up top and find Mark Wilde strapped down and almost converted into a drone, having a giant metal arm in the process, and a few other parts here and there. Then Kadeem shows up out of the blue. It basically takes place just like what happened in the movie. Highway 35 World Race involved a pretty big fight between Kurt Wilde and Brian Kadeem. After all, Z36, a mysterious racer who had been infiltrating the legs of the race, was found by Brian Kadeem to be trying to steal the Wheel of Power that he supposedly found on top of a pyramid. But we know that that's actually a fake. He didn't know that yet until he went through the portal onto the other side, where he found himself back in his own dimension. Kurt Wilde was found to be this mysterious driver who was chasing after him in pursuit of the wheel itself. But in Acceleracers, the roles are completely switched. Brian Kadeem is now converted to be a racing drone for Galorum, and Kurt Wilde is now trying to help his brother escape, only to be attacked by Kadeem, and eventually comes down to a point where eventually Wilde himself manages to regain consciousness and fight back against Kadeem as well. They were both able to succeed in this, and Kadeem is basically hanging on for dear life to the side of the building. Kurt explains to him that it's not too late. He could come back with them and possibly be saved from the drones' wrath. But this is basically where all the good things about Kadeem pretty much come to an end for good. Because he just lets go of the building and falls to his death. Yeah, just like that. That's the end of a big character in the franchise. Kind of sad when you think about it. It's just crazy that this show somehow was a thing made as a cartoon for kids to enjoy. It's just one of those things that I'm feeling that us adults can enjoy just as much as the kids would. But by all means, everybody else was able to escape back to the Acceladrome by usage of the EDR system. Everybody made it, thankfully. Even the likes of Porkchop, Shirako, and Monkey. They were basically all in one car with one EDR equipped in it. Yet, it actually managed to work. They were all teleported back to the Accelerome with Porkchop's new car that he got after Jawjammer was also destroyed, known as Pile Driver. Pretty much everybody else had also left their cars behind, except for Burt Wheeler. And not to mention, the Sweeper was also still around during this time. A Sweeper had also basically entered the Accelerome. So, what eventually we got here is something rather special. Because Vert himself turns out to be an Acceleron's own rival. He even gets an outfit from the Acceleron himself, after he was able to beat Galorum in an epic race across all the realms in the entire Highway 35 dimension itself. So, I mean, that's impressive. They just go right from the get-go, have all the Accelerachargers in motion, but Galorum did not complete the entirety of Highway 35 the proper way. Instead, it was Burt Wheeler who used his own skills, staying focused in the Lightning Realm, hydroplaning correctly in the Water Realm, having balance, which of course translates to traction in the Metro Realm, and then there's the Cosmic Realm, learning how to fight gravity. And that's just a few of what you need to know based on the realms in the entirety of Highway 35 itself. And after all that, they were able to reach the end of the race, the gateway to the world of the Accelerons, the beings that originally created Highway 35, a large, long track designed specifically for human racers. Thankfully, Vert manages to escape the Accelerome along with pretty much everybody else, as it would actually explode. Tesla would actually blow the place up by crossing two cables together, but Gig, who surprisingly was actually a member of the Silencers the entire time, secretly working with them, he himself decided to do something good for the last time that he would ever be seen again. He crosses the cables, causes the facility to explode, and everybody else was thankfully able to escape with their life. As for Burt Wheeler, well, he was also able to get through one last portal from the Wheel of Power. And after all that's basically happened, both Teku and Metal Maniacs surge off to find Vert, while Vert ends up in some mysterious world, which turns out to be the headquarters of the Silencers themselves. And then, here comes a shocking moment. One of the Silencers approaches him, and basically, it turns out to be his father. That's right. The whole time, Silencers apparently have been speculated for a long time to actually be older members, most likely from the movie, including the likes of Banji Castillo, Dan Dresden, Alec Wood, and possibly others here and there. But we don't quite know exactly what the full story of the whole thing is. In Comic-Con 2005, there was actually some concept art that Mainframe Entertainment would present supposedly as a teaser for what would be to come in what was presumed to be a fifth and final installment in the story. Acceleracers would technically get itself a true ending, helping us to understand why Major Wheeler was working for the Silencers this whole time, and how the crap Burt Wheeler was able to get out of something like this. Well, unfortunately, it never happened. It just simply stops with the reveal of Major Wheeler, and that's basically it. Sort of a cliffhanger that never truly got a continuation. It's a lot like what has happened with some failures in the past life. Some that have simply kept us hanging on the cliff, but a significant worsened peace of mind. But overall, this is a really long episode, and I do apologize if I've gone on and off limbs for a little too long now, but that's because this series was one of a kind. With only 4 episodes, plus some extras, a few music videos, and even an extra in the DVD version of the Acceleracers. A section called Meet the Cars, which, believe it or not, inspired me to create Hot Wheels hilarity under the spotlight. If you pretty much remember throughout 2021, 16 years after Acceleracers had come and gone, this is pretty much what I would go ahead and do. And wouldn't you know, I might actually consider going for a part 2 to the whole thing. After all, I've technically ended the whole thing a ways earlier than I would have normally done so. But nonetheless, it's just one good example of what I've been able to do with Hot Wheels hilarity-based content, for instance. Acceleracers has definitely inspired me to create a whole lot of different projects in continuation by any means. There was even a so-called theory based on what would all the new cars be had Acceleracers continued from beyond that very point with the 4th and final installment. Had the 5th and final part been finished and released, it's no doubt that there probably would be an entire new set of cars for Metal Maniacs and Teku. But it's not exactly likely that any of the cars that were presented in some presentations, including one of my own that I made years ago, it probably wouldn't have happened, at least in this particular discourse. But assuming if the 5th and final part were to have come around, we would have gotten ourselves a good way to finally end the story and end on a huge positive high note, by all accounts. But again, a lot of that stuff is up for speculation or even debate. Nevertheless, Acceleracers to this very day has left a pretty huge impression on a lot of people. Hardcore fans of Hot Wheels related media aren't necessarily wanting to see a lot of newer stuff take place. I mean, Hot Wheels Battle Force, Team Hot Wheels, and a few other things here and there. A lot of that stuff isn't necessarily as plentiful as what we've seen from Highway 35 and Acceleracers. This continuity in particular had lasted for less than 3 years, but amongst all things considered, especially after many things that had been done before then, like Velocity X, which at the time was its own success, enough to gain multiple ports, and enough to inspire a huge lineup of new models, as well as allowing Mattel to bring back older models that were made way back, like 70s and 80s, not far back. But even to this very day, we'll never truly forget the lasting impression that we had back in the day and the many continued understandings of how we'll never forget those good memories that we've had with all 4 of these 60-minute long episodes. And with all 36 models in tow, not including the 4 motorcycles that were in usage in the series as well, we still have ourselves a lot of fun with the likes of such models like Hollowback, Reverb, Spectite, Chicane, RDO5, RDO6, Nitrium, Covelight, Power Rage, Flathead Fury, Ratified, and many others. So, lots of other sets, of course, have been made as well, and lots of other Acceleracers related stuff have also been made. But even here, we really do miss them. This is one series that I feel like could have actually gone even further, had they actually have had the time or budget to make it happen. Nevertheless, I'm quite grateful for what I got. These are also free to watch on YouTube. Same thing with the movie. So if you wanted to marathon through the whole entire thing, it'd be almost 6 hours of your whole life. With everything put together. That's a pretty long time, and a lot of stuff that they made. Enough to keep you occupied for a good long time. So, anyways, Acceleracers is a great show, but still does need a lot of attention, because the lasting impression it's made on a lot of hardcore Hot Wheels fans, and the fact that such media nowadays relating to Hot Wheels will probably never truly give us such a lasting impression as this. Well, I'll see you guys next time in another installment of TV shows that deserve the spotlight very soon. But until then, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.